Hello classmates and teacher Dina. I hope you are all well. Before we proceed to the discussion of the transactional theory, let me introduce to you to Louise Rosenblatt. She was a highly influential thinker in literary and critical theory, reading pedagogy and education. She was a professor at New York University from 1948 until 1972, and she continued to teach for many years at other universities. The impact of her writings extends to aesthetic, communication, and media studies, and cultural studies. Her transactional theory of reading literature earned a permanent place among methodologies applied to the study of reader comprehension and improving the teaching of reading from preschool to college-age years. She is most widely known for her reader response theory of literature. The process of reading is a dynamic transaction between the reader and the text, in which meaningful ideas arise for readers from their own thoughtful and creative interpretations. Rosenblatt's work continues to inspire fresh academic research and curricular innovations. Rosenblatt's central text is Literature as Exploration, which went through 5 editions and remains in print. Her other widely studied work is The Reader, the Text, and the Poem, the transactional theory of the literary work. Many of her impactful articles were gathered in Making Meaning with Texts, selected essays. The Louise Rosenblatt papers are held at the Southern Illinois University Special Collections in Carbondale, Illinois. Linguists and educators have long been debating about how the reading process happens. They have argued how meaning is produced in reading. The fact that in every reading process, there are 2 parties involved, the reader and the text, which has led to the question of which party or parties play its or their role or roles in producing meanings. Some linguists think that print has already brought meaning in itself as formulated by its author, and the reader takes away meaning from it. On the other hand, some say that the reader is the key to the process. In between these 2 extremes emerges a strong belief that reading is a process of transaction between the reader and the text. Both play important roles in the production of meaning. Louise M. Rosenblatt has been very influential in the development of this transactional theory. According to this distinguished linguist and educator, every reading act is an event, a transaction involving a particular reader and a particular configuration of marks on a page, and occurs at a particular time in a particular context. Thus, the meaning depends on the process of transaction, and it never occurs prior to this process. The meaning does not reside ready-made in the text, in the reader, but happens during the transaction between the reader and text. Thus, reading means bringing meaning to a text in order to get meaning from it. The transactional theory of reading process. The transactional theory emphasizes that what print carries is only meaning's potential that interacts with the potential the reader brings during reading. As a reader sees a text, he uses his linguistic experiential reservoir to interact with the text. At this time, there exist multiple inner alternatives in the reader that resonate to the words, phrases, and sentences of the text. Even from the beginning of the process, the reader has had expectations, tentative feelings, which are actually the purpose of his reading. The purpose guides his selection of his potential in the reservoir and his synthesis. As he looks at the print, he seeks cues on which to base the expectations about what is coming next. This cue process is based on his past syntactic and semantic experience that shapes the transaction. As a linguistic pattern, the text is a part of what is being constructed. Through this process, possibilities concerning diction, syntax, linguistic and literary conventions, ideas, themes, the general meaning may develop. Every sentence that comes ahead will bring certain options and exclude the others, so that even when meanings have been developed, the process of selecting and synthesizing is constantly shaped and tested. If printed marks cannot match with the emerging synthesis, assimilation cannot occur and vaguely occurs, so the existing framework is revised. Here, rereading occurs. Now, a new framework is shaped until meaning is conveyed. Rosenblatt concludes that reading is a complex, non-linear, self-correcting transaction between reader and text that continues to arouse and fulfill expectations until finally, a synthesis or organization, more or less coherent and complete, emerges as the result of a to and from interplay between reader and text. Because no two readers are identical, the result of the transaction is not the same. Also, what is intended by the author of the text, the message he wants to produce, will not be received exactly the same by the reader. The triadic model. The development of the transactional theory is largely inspired by the triadic model stated by the American founder of semiotics, C.C. Peirce. He contended that the sign or symbol is in conjoint relation to the thing denotated and the mind. The involvement of the mind in the formation of meaning makes clear distinction with dyadic, two-element relationship between the sign and its object from the caesura. In the triadic model, meaning produced depends on the sign or symbol, the object, and the interpretant, according to Rosenblatt. Also, using the triadic model, the interpretant, the reader himself, has experience or schemata that influence how the sign-object relationship is interpreted. The sense of a word is the sum of all the psychological events aroused in our consciousness by the word, according to Vygotsky. The role of prior knowledge. The interpretation that a reader makes depends on the experience or knowledge he has. This experience, which includes linguistic experience, provide a reservoir from which to pick up what is needed for making the interpretation. The reservoir, for Rosenblatt, or schemata, for Weaver, is the prior knowledge that the reader brings during the reading process. Reading is not static, but an aura of potential triadic symbolization. As the transactional theory emphasizes that there is an interplay between text and reader, the reservoir and the potential selected also constantly changes until a perfect assimilation is produced. That is, a particular meaning for a particular reader in a particular context. But, however perfect the meaning is, it is also temporal. As the reader's reservoir changes, or the context is different, that particular meaning is no longer valid for the new transaction. Another meaning, whether similar in or completely different from the former, emerges. The changes of the schemata can happen in three basic ways: formation of new knowledge, expansion of existing knowledge, or alteration of existing knowledge. According to Weaver, the schemata depends in part on a variety of social factors: cultural, ethnic, and socioeconomic background, age and educational attainment, interests and values, and so forth. Not all the schemata are used in a particular reading. Only certain relevant schemata are selected and activated. This selection is based on a purpose of reading that signifies the importance of the purpose of reading. Rosenblatt calls this selective attention. So meaning is created through selective attention of the reader to a number of meaning possibilities, according to Haid. Public and private meanings. From a single text, Therefore, an array of meanings might occur, but still, language is the property of a community which shares within its community members lexical concepts of the language. Thus, a word can have two meanings, private and public. It is widely accepted that language is internalized by an individual as the result of his interaction with the environment. The particular meaning that emerges to a particular reader is a private meaning. On the other hand, language also has lexical public meaning shared by the users of the language. Making analogy to an iceberg, Bates, as quoted by Rosenblatt, says that the tip of the iceberg is the public meaning, which bases on the private meanings, the submerged part of the iceberg. So there's an array of private meanings that underlie the public meanings. Thus, the meanings in the dictionaries are public meanings. Stances of reading. It is rarely realized that in the process of reading, a reader may apply different directions of transaction towards a piece of writing. The direction depends on the purpose or stance of reading. The approach that we use to read a scientific article, for example, is different from the one that we use in reading literary work, say a short story. The application of a certain stance provides structure to a situation in order to limit possibilities of meaning, so that the reading becomes easier. Rosenblatt is the first one to use the term efferent and aesthetic to refer to those two stances. In efferent reading, the reader focuses on what he or she carries away after reading. A clear example is when we browse a telephone directory to find out a number. Similar are in reading cooking recipes, newspaper, and the like. In this reading, the reader is away from personal, qualitative elements of his response to the text. He concentrates on the end sought, finding the information that he seeks. In aesthetic reading, in contrast, the reader's primary concern is on what happens during reading. In this reading, the reader is absorbed in feelings of satisfaction or even frustration when the reading takes place. The reader's attention is centered directly on what he is living through during his relationship with that particular text, according to Rosenblatt. An example of this stance is in the reading of literary works like novels. These two stances, however, are not two distinctive things in which the presence of one during reading may exclude the other. Rather, they form a continuum wherein a particular reading, the stance, might fall in the aesthetic or in the efferent category. The figure shows that in efferent reading, for example, in reading a scientific paper, the reader's focus is more on getting information. But it is possible that while reading some parts of the paper, he or she slows down not because the information is difficult to grasp, but because there is some enjoyment offered by those parts. Similarly, while reading a novel, a reader might find some important information in it that he or she acquires as part of his or her knowledge. The dynamic, interrelated skills of reading and writing. Reading facilitates writing. People cannot write if they do not read. In the early stages, recognition of letters, word forms, punctuation, etc. during learning to read enables the children to write, either by activating their memories or by having a model from their reading. In later stages, when students read to learn, they read critically to obtain the message contained in a particular text. In this reading, they learn to get ideas and how ideas connect to each other. At the same time, the students also become more aware of the written language conventions, which include presentation and layout, register, cohesion, and surface features. The ability to recognize the presentation and layout of a text enables the reader to differentiate among text types, like advertisement differ from cookery books. Register involves the appropriateness of the language used based on the subject areas and purposes. Therefore, a novel, and a science textbook employ different registers. Cohesion refers to the ties occurs among sentences in a paragraph or among paragraph in a text. The ties produce meaningful context since parts of a piece of are interrelated. Finally, surface features such as the use of punctuation and conventional spelling also determines the success in reading. As the students' knowledge and critical thinking develop through reading, they will also develop production of this knowledge, either by intrinsic or extrinsic pressures or both. In other words, what they know about the written language conventions eventually becomes the reservoir for writing. Butler and Terbill argue that all these conventions cannot be learned through didactic teaching, but reading. It is mainly through reading that the students acquire all the techniques or conventions they know. To learn how to write for a newspaper, one must read newspapers. To write poetry, one must read poetry. Children must read like a writer in order to learn how to write as a writer. This clearly explains that reading facilitates writing. If the reading ability is low, it is positive that the writing ability is also low. In other words, literacy learning is not yet successful. Reading and writing are thus two mutually reinforcing processes. According to the writer, both skills are the acts of composing, of constructing meaning through language. Both challenge us to compose or construct meaning of a particular text. Readers, using their background knowledge and experience, compose meaning from the text. Writers, using their background knowledge and experience, compose meaning into text. To the writing process, when a writer faces a writing task, he recalls his linguistic, experiential knowledge. The meaning that emerges are the restructurings or extensions of the experiences the writer brings to the task. In writing, however, the flow of images, ideas, memories, words, or the recalled past experiences is not entirely random, even though the writer is engaged in free writing. There is a selective process that comes into play. Like in reading, in writing the writer needs to make some choices from and synthesis of these past experiences. Parallel with the reading process, this selection is also a trial and error activity. That is, an activity in which the writer tries to match between his linguistic experiential reservoir with the intended purpose and audience. This selection can be very clearly seen in the drafting and revising process. According to Rosenblatt, the selection and synthesis the writer does is also guided by the stance, either efferent or aesthetic, he adopts. How the reading, writing processes assist each other. Since reading and writing are closely connected, then our next concern is how do reading and writing assist each other. In other words, what do we learn about writing while involved in the reading process, and what do we learn about reading while involved in writing process? According to Butler and Terbill, in both reading and writing processes, we learn the conventions of written language. In terms of the text's presentation and layout, the reader learns the purpose of the writing from its layout. For example, advertisements, and learns that symbol and other prosodies like pictures can add an impact and meaning to writing. On the other hand, a writer learns to expect different purposes as indicated by presentation and layout, and to see all the other information on the page like pictures. In terms of register, the reader learns that the text should follow a logical sequence so that it makes sense. Different registers follow different sets of conventions. There needs to be sufficient information to allow readers to follow what is happening and make predictions about what might be coming. There are different registers for different purposes and audience. And there are beginnings, endings, sequencing ideas, events, etc. appropriate to different registers. For the writer, what he learns about reading are to expect the text to follow a predictable sequence to make sense, to appreciate and notice conventions authors use in different registers, and to predict likely outcomes based on information given in the text. Cohesion is another convention that readers and writers can learn. The reader learns that writers use cohesive devices like inferences to tie the text together so readers can follow it. And for the writer, he learns to expect cohesive devices used to tie text together. Finally, readers and writers also take benefits from their writing and reading in relation to the surface features contained in the text. About surface features, the reader learns about the function of punctuations in a text and about spelling conventions. Similarly, the writer learns to expect punctuations to guide him in his reading. And he also learns about word attack skills like initial sound, final sound, and syllabification. The implication of the theory for language instruction. In classroom instruction, there is an important component takes part. That is the teacher. The involvement of the teacher should provide a good environment for the students in their reading-writing activities. First of all, teachers have to be aware of the nature of reading instruction. According to Presley et al., reading instruction aims to producing independent, successful readers who engage in such processes in their own. This implies that, although all readers read for meaning, they read differently in different contexts, depending on their purposes of reading, the nature and difficulty of the text, their knowledge of the world to which the text refers, their interest in the text, and their motivation to understand the text. Probst draws the implications of the transactional theory for the classroom reading-writing practices. There are 7 principles offered to teachers as discussed. First, students must be free to deal with their own reaction to the text. The words are just the symbols, and all the process happens in the mind. The students have their own mind, so they will develop their relationship with the text and in their own way. This implies that instead of asking the students to answer a set of questions, the teacher has to encourage them to develop their interaction with the text and let them deal with whatever first comes as their result of the transaction. In the initial stages, the students can be guided by the teacher. As Rautmann recommends, teachers must use open-ended questions before finally the students can formulate their own questions. Second, the classroom situation and the relationship with the teacher should create a feeling of security. This principle talks about the condition in which the students can respond humanely and gently. Small group discussions are highly recommended for a variety of reasons, such as interactive discussions are very important in reading, and small group discussions promote the feeling of togetherness and ownership. Longer wait times also help students away from time limit pressures. Third, the teacher must provide time and opportunity for an initial crystallization of a personal sense of work. This means that response beginning with "I think" should be encouraged because such a response indicates that the students have had critical thinking, which reflects their process of accumulating ideas and put them in their own judgment about the text. Journal writing and group discussions are very good activities. Fourth, teachers must avoid undue emphasis on form in which the students' reactions are couched. This implies that the activities should not be geared on the recognition of text styles or structure. The reader has to use what they have read and learned from the text for his own creative development. For example, after reading about slavery, the students can write a letter to, say, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, expressing his feelings about slavery. Fifth, the teacher must try to find points of contact among the opinions of students. This is the fundamental principle for discussions in the classroom. Because reading has a social function, diversity in opinions will become the means to socialize the students with their environment. Here, they learn how to exchange ideas, to differ in points of view, and to build respect to differences. Sixth, the teacher's influence should be the elaboration of the vital influence inherent in the text itself. This implies that a text provides information as well as experience that make the students not only think about the text but also feel that they are part of it. They are engaged in the situation and memory brought by the transact between them and the text. The teacher has to help the students find ways to gain as much experience as possible from their engagement with the text. Last, the students must still be led to reflection and analysis. So the teacher has to provide room for the students to further engagement with the text by having critical analysis of it. The result of this process is whether they modify, reject, or accept the text. Finally, the transactional theory signifies that there is a particular transaction and engagement between the reader and the text during the reading process. The transactional theory signifies that both the reader and the text play important roles in the formation of meaning. Meaning is produced by continuous transaction between the reader and the text, employing the meaning potential of the text and the reader's experiential reservoir. While the reader is active in selecting and synthesizing the potential of his reservoir, the text contributes to the shaping of this selection and hypothesis, resulting in an interplay between them. Reading and writing are interrelated skills in which transactional theory is also applicable. The implication of this theory for the teaching of reading is clear, that the teacher must facilitate students' needs and interests so that the students' reading yields benefits for the improvement of their knowledge and language skills. Thus, the transactional theory provides some implications for the classroom language instruction. And thank you very much for listening. This is Jerome Hilario, your discussant.